This will be a video where I will talk about why I think that the Russian army and navy and air force are basically paper tigers. Like, I don't think they are as strong and as serious forces as, for example, the Israeli army, the army, yeah. The thing is, like, we don't need to consider which planes they have, which tanks they possess, and which equipment they necessarily possess. Like, a lot of things are kind of seen on the ground right now, and the Russian army and armed forces are incapable of waging war against NATO countries. Forget about countries like, I don't know, the United States, but even with Poland they would struggle, I claim. And the arguments for that are, like, I have basically an economic argument and a military argument. The economic argument makes kind of more sense in a way. Like, for beginners, let's think about Russia. Russia has roughly 160 million inhabitants. Each of those inhabitants have roughly 10,000 USD in GDP per capita. Of course, it is kind of likely that their actual welfare is kind of higher. Like, let's multiply it by 3 and say their actual GDP is comparable to 30,000 USD, which is which is kind of an exaggeration probably, but yeah, like, for the argument's sake we can do that. Let's compare them with Ukraine, with roughly 40 million inhabitants and way smaller GDP per capita of 4,000 USD, and let's give it the same multiplier and 12,000 USD in purchasing parity. Now, we know that this country, with a tax base that is at least 4 times the size of Ukraine and probably even 12 times the size of Ukraine's tax base, is struggling to really achieve a breakthrough in Ukraine. And Ukraine is a very poor country with very limited resources. And now one might say or discount that by saying, like, yeah, but Ukraine gets the resources from NATO countries, like international aid. Let's pretend the international aid is $200 billion, which wasn't. It was somewhere around 100 billion. But let's pretend, for argument's sake, it's 200 billion US dollar. Like, that's still way, way, way less than Russia spent on the war. And like, Russia determines the variables of the war. Like, first it was a surprise attack. Surprise was on their side. Second, at the start of the war, it had everything as it wanted. Ukraine wasn't mobilized. Like, at that time of the war, perhaps Ukraine had at best like 300,000 men on the front line, but now it's probably somewhere with reservists around 1 million men. Like, it would have been an easy win, and they had comparable amount of soldiers. So, and they were actually also considered better equipped, but of course they weren't. So, like, the thing is, now Europeans are kind of scared that this army will turn around after losing against Ukraine, an arguably poor country, to Poland and try to win the war. Like, first thing, like, the military argument goes somewhere like this. Like, both sides don't have really combined arms warfare. Like, now you would say, yeah, but like, Russia is targeting civilian infrastructure, but like, you won't win a war by targeting civilian infrastructure. That just won't happen. And like, what does Russia do? They bomb Ukraine not even with planes but with rockets, and like, quite expensive rockets. Okay, the Shahed drones are cheap, but everything else is kind of expensive what they use. And that's basically a terrible way to wage war, not just from human cost perspective, but also from tactical perspective. Like, they're not gaining any ground, but they are just doing a strategic air campaign without the means to do that. And like, that's why the Russians fail. And now you have to imagine the Russians just attack a country like Poland with a comparable population and like way a way richer country. Like, that's basically the GDP per capita of Poland. So Poland's GDP per capita is almost equal as, okay, it's not equal as the Russian, but it's kind of comparable. So, and like, those guys probably can do combined arms warfare. Like, the thing is, I can describe more or less how the front in Ukraine looks like. Like, that's perhaps the contact line. Here are soldiers on each side, and here are soldiers on the other side. And then here are concealed artillery positions. Sometimes the other side has them too. And of course, the Russian side has a few more soldiers, and they tend to do attacks and attacks and attacks. Like, sometimes they try to attack one sector, they fail, then they attack another sector, they fail, and so on. Of course, they use also artillery to pound these guys and these guys, like counter battery fire in the one case, and they also attack these guys, like they target these guys. But like, as you can see, there is no air force really involved, and the reason why it's not involved is because Ukraine's air defenses are kind of too strong. So the worry is, if this side sends a plane of $160 million, okay, perhaps they are more like $90 million on this side, and I don't know, a missile of $2 million shoots it, then like, the Russian side would have a giant loss and also a lose of face. So the Russians don't even try to do like tactical or like close air strikes. Like, normally you would do something like this. You would have, I don't know, you would have a few tanks, not too many necessarily, like a few, and then there would be probably strong points where the tanks can't go through, and then you would order airstrikes. Or you would probably not even have the tanks, you would do it with infantry, and then the strong positions you would get rid with airstrikes. But yeah, the Russians can't do that. They have artillery, and that's also nice that they have artillery, but if they use the artillery and the concealment of the artillery fades, then the Ukrainians will fly drones there and destroy that. Now imagine like the Russians fight against an enemy who has air superiority. Like this entire thing would never be possible, even if the Russians have 10 times the manpower than the Europeans or whoever they are fighting against. Because there would be probably something like a armored column or mechanized column, and they would attack the Russian side, which would have infantry behind it, artillery posts. Yeah, sure, a few of those tanks might get destroyed, but each time there's strong resistance, there are tanks getting against them, or I don't know, there are missiles from the infantry that target tanks. Like they would get airstriked in the case of European or NATO armies, and yeah, like that's kind of a bit forgotten or not taken seriously. Yeah, sure, like the Russians have enormous amounts of planes, tanks, but they are not like the planes. Like on paper, it's like they have a lot of planes. They have a lot of strategic planes and a lot of tactical planes, like fighter jets, and long range jets. But in practice, they are never used in Ukraine, despite Ukraine having way fewer air defense systems than the Europeans and also being financially strained. But like still they can't do that kind of combined arms warfare where they use planes against tanks or superior like they can't integrate air warfare in their ground attacks, and that's the fatal flaw they suffered from the beginning of the war. And actually one should think that they would have been able to get better in that, but it's rather the opposite. With time they got worse and worse with that. And for example, countries like Israel, generally Western militaries have proven that they are capable of that. Israel, the United States, they were all capable of it. Like, not even that they were capable of it, they were even capable in places like Libya to do combined arms warfare against opposing forces, like opposing government forces, in cooperation with rebels. Like usually one would think rebels wouldn't be able to coordinate that well, but apparently they were able to coordinate with Western forces. And yeah, so that's kind of important to consider, I think. Yeah, that's kind of my point. So the Russians are not that strong, and the way they conducted themselves in Ukraine is, if anything, pretty terrible. And there's another thing that is often forgotten also in the war with Iran. Like, people think, wow, one country has so many missiles, and if they fire missiles, it's like devastating. But that's not how it works. Like, missiles are always more expensive than planes. like expensive. Like it's impossible. Like those missile systems are the same that existed. Okay, they are not technically the same, but they are not vastly more efficient than the missile systems of the Germans in World War II, like the V2 and V1 of World War II. Like they are imprecise, they cost a lot of money, and like it is extremely expensive to use them. Like it's much cheaper to get a big plane loaded full with explosives and then deliver it. That's cheaper than artillery, cheaper than anything you can imagine. Like even with artillery, it's more expensive. Like um, if you fire an artillery shell, it looks something like that. Like this is the artillery shell, and this part of the artillery shell is just the thing that you need for the uh, explosive part of the artillery shell to get off, like to leave the barrel. So this is basically the waste in a sense. And a plane that fires bombs or that drops bombs, and that's all explosive. So in this case, you just expend fuel for the plane, that's all. But in this case, with each shell here needs also the power and energy to get off the barrel and end up on the enemy. Yeah, so like that's why I think in like there was no time in history where a city was just shelled and got severe destruction only from shelling. Like that's extremely expensive. But like air raids, they are extremely good at strategic destruction. Like those things, like bombing cities, is seldomly decisive in a war. Like selecting ground targets and ground warfare is kind of superior in many ways. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say basically.